guys, it's Dan O'Mani here out of the in-house San Francisco office, and I'm really excited to be joined today with Keyana Corliss. She's the head of global comms at Databricks. Keyana, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So before we dive in, can you just tell me a little bit about your background and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I have kind of a crazy background. So I actually was not a formally trained PR professional. I went to school, got my degree in finance, and was going to go to Wall Street and decided that sounded exhausting in a like mentally exhausting way. And I got my master's in broadcast journalism. And I spent about 6 months working for the ABC affiliate in DC, where I covered the Washington Capitals. And I was interviewing one of the stars of the team, and I asked him a question. He gave me kind of an answer. And so I was like, I'm going to ask you this again, but here's what I think you should say, which you should not do as a journalist. But I did it anyway, and because I couldn't help myself. And he answered the question very well. And the Caps PR person came up to me and goes, "You are the worst journalist ever. But you'd be a very good PR person." And I was like, "Are you out of your mind? I'm not going to go into PR." Because I swear at the time, I thought PR was like the chicks that stand outside the parties in New York City. I was like, I'm not doing that. And so he was like, "No, I think you should look into it." And so I sent about 1 million applications out. I got one response, and it was this little tech PR firm in DC, and they happened to have Tableau as a client. Nobody really knew Tableau at the time, and I just happened to get on this client. And so I actually had no idea how PR worked. I had no idea. So I remember asking, like, "So you just like send these emails to the reporters?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like these long emails with like stories in them already? They read these? And they're like, "Oh yeah." And I'm like, "I don't think they read these." And so I automatically had this like totally different approach to PR. Is I would just reach out to a reporter and say, "Hey, I have a story idea. Do you have a couple minutes?" And they would respond to that and be like, "Yeah, what do you got?" Because I think instead of sending these like, long form pitches, I would just sort of treat them as human beings, because they are human beings. And I started to build like a pretty good relationship. At the same time, Tableau was becoming like a pretty hot company. They had like a really cool story to tell, and I was excited to tell it. And I think the combination of those two things, I moved up pretty quickly. And so quickly, in fact, that at a certain point, and of course, Tableau went public, and I got to kind of lead the PR team on that. And so there was a whole lot of kind of visibility that came that way. So we had a lot of clients that came and wanted to work with us. And Tableau at that point said, "Do you want to just come in-house and focus only on us?" And I had a 1-year-old at the time, and the whole flying from DC to San Francisco was starting to get a little old with the 1-year-old. Yeah. So I said, sure. And I went to Tableau and ended up heading up global comms there, and never really looked back. And it was just the most amazing experience, the most amazing company. I've made lifelong friends there, and I had just had so much fun. I also just learned a ton about being a public company and everything that goes with that, because there's a lot that goes with that. And that was sort of how I got into it. But I think when I was in college, if you had told me I was going to be a global PR lead for a tech company, I would have been like, what tech company? What are you talking about? Even though I went to Carnegie Mellon. So all those guys are now like heading up tech companies. But I would have just never believed you. And so it's interesting how life works out. But when Databricks asked me to come over, it was an awesome opportunity because we had gone through the sale of Salesforce at Tableau. I had kind of hit everything I was going to do at Tableau. And so the chance to come to Databricks and do it again was so an exciting opportunity for me. And so here I am at Databricks, and it's been like the best, I think almost 8 months now. So it's the best 8 months.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's it. That's a super long-winded answer.
No. I mean, there's a few things I didn't know in there, so that's really good. Like I started in PR with my career, so I feel like I can say this without offending anybody, but like I think some of the best PR people come from non-PR backgrounds, right? Like not just journalists, but we work with some people who are in public affairs or in politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with people who left Google's legal department or teaching jobs. And I think as long as people are smart and curious and passionate, they can kind of figure the rest out.
Yeah.
So no surprises.
Totally.
So let's talk about Databricks. I mean, you said it, you've been less than a year. What have been your big priorities since joining, and how has it gone?
Yeah, so the cool thing about Databricks is that it's just got such a incredible story, and I've always been very kind of drawn to mission-driven companies, which in enterprise software there aren't a ton that like are truly mission driven. Tableau was definitely one of them. We were on a mission to make everyone see and understand data. And Databricks is the same. We solve the world's toughest problems. And so when you find a company like that as a comms professional, you just are dying to tell that story to anyone who can listen, especially when there's just so much impact that we have on a daily basis. And to be able to get that out there and to show what our customers are able to do with Databricks, or what our employees, how Databricks is affecting our employees' lives in such a positive manner. Like all of those stories for me have been really exciting. I think one thing with Databricks is, we have a really, really smart technology. I mean, our technology is amazing. And when you have a technology like that, it can often be like too smart, right? So it's like too, it's out of reach for people. And so what I've really tried to do, and I think the company has tried to do, and I think we've done a really good job, but we still have a ways to go, is really making Databricks simple. And so that's everything from the product. We have incredible engineers that are making it even more simple to use every single day. But then on the comm side is telling those stories that really help people understand in a digestible way, like what is it that Databricks allows us to do? And so we've seen some incredible stories out there, from drug development. Regeneron is one of our incredible customers that they use Databricks to actually pinpoint the genome that's responsible for chronic liver disease. And there's drugs in development to help with that. And so like when I tell anyone that, like I can tell my parents, I can tell, my kids, that's easy to understand, right? That's like a simple, like, oh, wow, AI is going to have an impact in like a very life-changing way. And so the ability to tell those stories has been kind of my number one priority over the last 8 months. And I think we're doing a good job. I think that, we definitely still have a ways to go. But I probably will say that you can interview me in like 5 years and I'll probably say the same thing. So
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have to ask, I mean, I haven't done this, but I work with some people who have joined companies virtually. So how was that? Like, what are some of the maybe unforeseen challenges that came up with joining a team when you've been totally remote?
Well, so I think I have like a different viewpoint than I think most people do on this. So I talked about, I lived in DC. My husband and I and our kids moved to Denver about 3.5 years ago, just to be closer to the West Coast. I didn't want to go all the way over to the West Coast, but we wanted to be able to ski and be outdoors and all that good stuff. So we've been in Denver. So I've been remote for a really long time. Like I was remote before it was cool to be remote. And so I flew a lot to San Francisco, or to Seattle and back, where Tableau is based. So I've been remote for a really long time, but I actually am not someone who likes to be alone at home. I like to be in an office. I like to be around people. And so I used to go to Seattle a ton to have that FaceTime, to get to know my coworkers. In a pandemic, you don't really have that option, right? So for me, starting a new job, virtually, I think actually kind of leveled the playing field for someone like me, because everybody was remote. So it didn't matter that I was in Denver. Like the saddest thing was always, everyone was in the conference room and then like I was the lone Zoom on the,
Yeah.
the projector or whatever. And so that is, I feel like I've had the playing field leveled off for me a little bit. But actually, I will say this about Databricks, and I have to give credit to our Chief People Officer, Amy Recknader, and all of our people team. They have made such a priority out of like having a connection amongst employees, like a genuine connection, not just like Zoom happy hours, that it has actually been a lot easier than I thought it would be to start a job remote. And so in that sense, I think like it's been awesome. I think that it's, would I love to go to San Francisco? Yeah, I cannot wait to go meet my colleagues in person, but I think it's actually been a lot easier than I would have anticipated.
That's great. Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day about how, before the pandemic, we had a couple people who were remote, and I always felt bad because if we were on the phone, our team with a client, and then we finished the call, and then we say, okay, how are we going to get some of this stuff done? That remote person is often left out of that conversation, and that's sometimes the most important part, so
totally.
But everybody being remote means it's a level playing field. So I totally hear you there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know the backstory here, but I definitely want to hear it direct from you. So Databricks fundraised earlier this year. It was massive, $1 billion from some really top tier investors, $27 billion valuation, or was it 28? The leak
28. But who's counting?
The leak that happened. What happened there, and how did you manage that?
Well, so I'll start with this. There's a lot of money being thrown around right now to everybody. And so, I think that fundraising is really hot right now. I think I can say that, completely separate from Databricks. And so, there's a lot of money out there, and there's a lot of people involved in these things, like a ton of people. And the rules around them are not as like strict and stringent as when you go public, and so one thing I think is important is that when I was at Tableau, we actually bootstrapped. So we didn't raise a ton of money. So this is actually my first time going through like a massive fundraise like this. And I've been at a public company forever, right? So like there are very strict rules about what you can and can't do at a public company. I think that, with fundraising, there's just a lot of people involved. And with anything with a lot of people involved, people talk to one another, and, reporters are smart. They have sources. They will get what they need out of those sources. And so I think that, but there's two things that I think are really important. One is there's a lot of misinformation in leaks, right? Like you don't get the full story. There's not full context. And so I think that that's super important. And so I think not commenting on those is really important because, ultimately you need to do these situations, you need to do what's best for the company and what's best for like in the middle of, if you're going through a fundraising round, like the most important thing is closing that fundraising round. So sometimes it's very, very, very worth it to get less coverage and not screw up what's happening for the company, than to like feed into coverage, right? And so like as PR people, we're wired to be like bigger, better, more. Let's do it. Like all press is good press. Let's go for it, which is like so not the case. Not all coverage is worth it. And so being aligned with your legal, your finance, your executive team, and making sure like, what are we solving for here? Like, are we still in the middle of fundraising? Are we done with this? Is it closed? Is it not closed? Like these leaks often happen before anything's closed. So like it could actually just fizzle out. Like that happens all the time, right? And so I think it's super, super important to be aligned with your executive teams and make sure that you are solving for what they're trying to solve for. So I think that's number one, and it's just kind of inevitable. I think the tricky part with this, and for me as a comms leader, I also manage a lot of our internal comms. And so I think the internal piece is actually a lot harder than the external piece. The external piece will just kind of play itself out eventually. But you have a lot of employees that they're seeing this, right? And so I've always said as a comms professional, my actual first target audience is our employees, always. First and foremost, it's a headline to me is important, and how it makes our employees feel. Does it make them proud to work at Databricks? Does it make them proud to be part of this, family? Like, that's so important to me. And so when you have all this speculation and you can't really comment on it, and you want to be transparent, but you want to also be very cognizant that like things are fluid. I think those are things that are difficult. And so there's no like magic way to fix it. Like, I'm not going to tell you exactly, there's a roadmap for it. But what I will say is having a really good relationship with your people teams, your legal teams, your finance teams, your executive teams, and like making sure that PR has a seat at that table is super, super important. I often say that like a PR person's best skill is how they manage their internal relationships, because that can have a huge impact on what you're able to do externally. And so, and in these instances, it's so important.
Yeah, makes total sense. I always feel like when companies make bad decisions and someone's like, what PR person approved that? I'm like, they probably didn't. They probably just haven't been able to convince someone else not to do something.
Totally. Totally. I mean, ultimately, like we take we get a lot of the glory for sure. We also take a lot of the blame. And so, I've always, someone said this to me a long time, gave me this advice a long time ago. And it was, don't ever take criticism or praise. Don't ever let criticism or praise change you. And so never, take the credit, but realize that like, you can't really take full credit, and take the blame, but don't really ever take the full blame to yourself, and so like, be confident enough that no amount of criticism or, blame can, praise or criticism can really alter your state. And so I think it's the same with PR. And so being able to like manage that internally is super, super important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I felt like for our teams, like you're handed stuff that is really easy to work with, and then you're handed stuff that's really hard to work with. And what you have to have the context to say, we did the best we could with the situation, or this was great, but let's be honest, like this was a slam dunk, right? And so like otherwise your perception of what you did can change, and that can get a little weird. So I totally agree with you there. And I think that takes a little bit of time to learn. I think, when I was more junior, I was living on the highs and lows probably way too much.
You totally do, because you get, when you're young, and you get those hits, they're almost, I mean, like they're literal hits. Like it's like hits of a drug, and you're like high off the hit, and you will do anything for that next hit. And it's absolutely a drug. Like, and so the lows of rejection are really low. And so I think a mature comms professional finds a way to live somewhere in the middle, where those highs are not to the point where like they overinflate, and those lows are not to the point where they completely discourage or deter you. And so living somewhere in the middle, I think I think that was when I was like, okay, I finally hit a point of like maturity that I can understand that like some of the highs are not worth, what might come from them.
Totally agree. Yeah. And it takes a little while to get there, but I think we're all happier when we do.
Totally.
So what does Databricks have on the horizon? I mean, like what's going on in 2021 that has you particularly excited?
Well, I'm excited to go to San Francisco at some point.
Yes.
see the office. I think that we've got, I think that this is going to be a really exciting year. We are, we talked about this right before we announced the funding. It was like, on January 31st, we were one company. And then on February 1st, when we were all of a sudden a $28 billion company, we were totally different. And so, I think we're heading into this like really exciting time where more people are getting to know us. We're building awareness. People are, really want to come work here. We're like attracting some of the best and brightest people that I've ever met. And honestly, this place is already the best and brightest people I've ever met. So for us to continue to attract that is just like so exciting. I think we've got more stories to tell. And And I think that, we're going to really be able to flex our kind of PR muscle. We're going to have, I've seen this as we tell more impact stories, as kind of our awareness grows, there's more journalists that, want to tell our story. And so we are able to get more creative with what we're going out there with. So I'm super excited about it. There's going to be a lot going on, and we're going to grow as a company, I think, like literally and physically.
Yeah, right.
And so I guess that's what happens when you raise $1 billion. But yeah, I think, I'm excited to just see what's next and tell more stories and have some fun.
That's great. Anything else I should have asked, Keyana, before we wrap up?
No, you know what? I think that it's a really exciting time to be in comms, and I will take an unsolicited a moment to maybe like give some advice to the future comms leaders of the world. We have a team like mantra here that I didn't come up with this, but I'm like very obsessed with it. And it's called "Take it personal, but don't take it personally," or "Make it personal, but don't take it personal."
Yeah.
And I think that as you're like becoming more mature in your career, as you're growing, a lot of us are type A, we're overachieving, we did well in school, all of those things, we did well in sports. And so we get into the real world, and the real world's hard. The real world will like put you in your place real quick. And I think when I was younger, I took a lot of things personally. And it was because I cared a lot. Like it was really important to me to do well. And I still, I struggle with this a lot. I struggle with how do I constantly overachieve? How do I do better? How do I get better? And that's just the nature of how I am. But I think like I've found that the people that are the most kind of not just really good at their job, but also like content in their day to day, and they're able to perform on like let's call it a healthy level, are the people who, they care about their job 100%. And so they make it personal. Like it's super important to them. And they get through the days by like, making their work mean something. But they don't take things personally, right? So like, remember that this is, at the end of the day, we are not surgeons. Nobody is going to die if we get it wrong. And, don't take things personally. And I think that, if I could go back to my 25-year-old self, I would say start using eye cream early. And 2, I would say stay out of the sun. And then I would say, don't make this personal. Take it personally. Care. You should absolutely care, but you shouldn't take things personally. You should remember that like the real world is just, it's just there to make you a little bit stronger. But at the end of the day, go back to like what makes you genuinely happy, and whatever that is. For me, it's like I run in the mornings, or I ski a lot. So remember that, like, have that center, and go there when you need to.
Yeah.
So
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I agree. I think it took me having a kid to really learn that, because I finally was supposed to like share my attention with something other than work.
Totally.
I think when we're young, we tend to like, so much of our identity and ego is work, that when things are going bad, it's like your whole life is a mess. But you need, I think it shouldn't be that big of a piece of the pie, but it takes a little while to get there, and so we can give this advice, but like, I actually would wonder if my 25-year-old self would have listened to me or been like, that's loser talk.
I mean, my 25-year-old self would have been like, you'll never get anywhere with that nonsense.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like, you just have to work harder. So like, listen to this chick, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So, I mean, I don't think my 25-year-old self would have listened to that, but for all the 25-year-olds out there, like, listen to me. It'll be okay.
I agree. I totally agree. Well, Keyana, thank you so much. This has been so fun. It's always great to talk
awesome.
This stuff for others. And we're thrilled to be working with Databricks this year and before, because it's been such a wild ride so far, and it's been awesome working with you.
Oh, we love you guys. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Keyana.